because the journalists are gatekeeping, right? They've got a big archive and they haven't published everything from it. And I told them not to publish everything from it.
Why did you do that? Why did you do that?
Because, again, it gets back to legitimate secrets and illegitimate secrets. Some spying, from my perspective, career spy, is okay, right?
Agreed.
If you have hacked a terrorist's phone, right, and you're getting some information about that, useful.
Agreed. Yeah.
If you're spying on a Russian general in charge of a rocket division, useful, right? But there are lines and degrees in that where it's not useful. Now, the examples that I just gave you, these are targeted. This is where you're spying on an individual. They're a known named person that is being monitored for a specific reason that is related.
Hopefully from a warrant.
Right. Well, even for foreign intelligence, in some indications, you don't need a warrant strictly. Although I think they should have warrants for all of these investigations because they established a court for precisely this reason called the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, right? And there's not a judge in the world who wouldn't stamp a warrant saying, hey, spy on Abu Jihad over here, right? And if you want to spy on another guy, Boris Badenov of the Rocket Division, right, that's okay. They're going to go with that. But then you look at these edge cases, and in the archive that I provided to journalists, there have been stories that have come down where they've spied on journalists, right? They've spied on human rights groups. And these kind of things, I think... people miss. I'm going to throw up some slides here, so forgive me if this gets weird and I put up the wrong ones. But since I came forward, this Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court that the government says authorized these programs 15 different times was overruled by the first open courts to look at the program. These are federal courts here, right, that said, no, actually, these programs are unlawful. They're likely unconstitutional. When you start looking at the facts, you see, even within the context of the very loose restrictions and laws that apply to the NSA and surveillance, they say they broke their own laws, 2,776 times in a single year. And then you asked about that thing that motivates me, like why I came forward. We had been trying as a country before I came forward to prove the existence of these programs legally. Because this is our means of last sort of recourse in our system, right? We got the executive, we got the legislature, we got the judiciary, right? So Congress makes the laws, the executive is supposed to carry them out, the courts are supposed to play referee. The executive had broken the laws. Congress was turning a blind eye to the laws. And the courts were, and this is just months before I came forward, going, well, it does appear that the ACLU and Amnesty International, like all of these human rights groups and non-governmental organizations, had established that, these programs are likely unlawful. They likely exist. They're simply classified. But the government responded with this argument that you just saw, saying that, well, it's a state secret if they do exist. You, the plaintiffs, don't have hard, concrete evidence that they do exist. And the government is saying legally you have no right to discover evidence from the government, write documents, demand documents, or demand an answer from the government as to whether whether or not these things exist, because the government's just going to give its standard, what they call GLOMAR response. We can neither confirm nor deny that these things exist. Which leaves you out in the cold, which leaves the courts out in the cold. The courts go, look, the government could be breaking the law here. Look, they could be violating the Constitution here. But because you can't prove it, and because the government doesn't want to play ball, and the government says, if we were doing this, it would be legal, and it would be necessary for national security or whatever, the court can't presume to know national security better than the executive because the courts aren't elected. And so this leads to this fundamentally broken system where, okay, the only way to have the courts review the legality of the programs is to establish the programs exist. But the programs are classified, so you can't establish they exist unless you have evidence. But providing that evidence to courts, to journalists, to anyone is a felony, right? That's punishable by 10 years per count under the Espionage Act. And the government has charged every source of public interest journalism who's really made a significant difference in these kind of cases since Daniel Ellsberg, really going back to that, under the same Espionage Act. It's always the same law. And there's no distinction to government between whether you sold information to a foreign government for private benefit, right, or whether you provided information only to journalists for the public interest. And that's a fundamentally harmful thing, I think. When you look at things that have come in the wake of this, we're talking about the post-2013 court rulings that found what the government was doing was unlawful. You see the courts saying actually that leaks, or air quotes leaks, can actually be beneficial. A leak is used in the governance, and this is from a federal court. These are not exactly my biggest supporters. They're recognizing that although leak implies harm, it implies something that's broken, it's actually helpful. It's a leak that's letting in daylight in this context. That is the only thing that allows the system to operate in a context where 1 year before I came forward, we had the NSA saying this kind of stuff didn't happen. We had, hang on, this famous exchange, which more than anything made me realize this was a point of no return. Because I've told you this, you've heard this, but if you haven't seen it, you might not believe me, right? Maybe I'm a sketchy guy, whatever. One of those senators I told you that objected to this stuff, that was doing the Lassie barks for all those years, Ron Wyden, was confronting the most senior spy in the United States, General James Clapper, who was then the director of national intelligence, right? There's no guy higher than him. The buck stops with him when it comes to intelligence. He's testifying under oath in front of Congress, right? But more broadly, in front of the public. This is televised. And Ron Wyden asked him a very specific question about a program, mind you, that Ron Wyden knows exists. Because he has security clearance, he sits on the Intelligence Committee. And he knows there's domestic mass surveillance. And this is how it goes. This is how the top spy responds under oath.
So what I wanted to see is if you could give me a yes or no answer to the question, does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not wittingly.
All right.
So that was a lie. Wyden knew it was a lie. Clapper knew it was a lie. He actually admitted it was a lie after I came forward, 3 months later. But he said it was the least untruthful thing he could think of to say in the context of being in the hot seat there. But what does it mean for a democracy when you can lie under oath to Congress, and the congressman even knows you're lying to them, but they're afraid to correct you? And Wyden, by the way, it wasn't a surprise. Wyden gave him those questions 24 hours in advance, and he wrote a letter afterwards asking for Clapper to amend his testimony, right? Not even at a press conference, but just say this was incorrect, whatever, so he could go through the legal process and show his fellow congressmen that there was a problem and that they needed to do it. But all of that was refused to us. All of it was denied to us. And here I am, sitting at the NSA, next to my buddies who I've talked to about these programs. I've gone, look at this, and they're laughing at it. I'm laughing at it. And it's not that we go, oh, ha, 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 he's getting away with it. It's like, what are you going to do? These guys are, they're bullshitters. The system is built on lies. That even many people, many experts who have studied this know are lies. But if you can't prove they are lies, how do you move beyond that? And that's really a question that has never been more relevant than I think it is today under the current White House.
So you're in this position where you have this information and you know that these surveillance systems are in place and they're unconstitutional, and you feel this deep responsibility to let the American people know about this. What makes you take the leap?